co-founders of Open Source Defense, on building a venture fund for gun companies. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over today if you want to sign up for our free weekly newsletter to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective that focuses on hard news reporting and analysis. This week, we are talking about a really interesting new venture in the gun business space. From a group called Open Source Defense and their new venture capital fund for firearms and firearms-related technologies. And to do that, we have the co-founders of Open Source Defense with us, Kareem, Shaya, and Chuck R. Welcome to the show, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with just a little bit of background about the two of you, where you came out of and what exactly Open Source Defense, the overall project, is. And then we'll get into the venture capital aspect a little bit after that.
Yeah. Well, we both came from long careers in tech, still work in tech, and had the experience of being the gun guy in the office. And finding over time that there's just this underground community of people who are gun curious or want to buy a gun or even think gun rights are important, believe it or not, and didn't feel comfortable saying that or even comfortable thinking that because they didn't have a place kind of culturally to hang their hat that like, this is kind of okay and it doesn't come with other political baggage that I'm not interested in. So we started OSD as like a Twitter, Instagram, we have a weekly Substack to just build kind of cultural momentum around this idea that you can think gun rights are important and think guns are cool technology without signing up for a bunch of other political stuff that you might not be interested in.
And Chuck, can you just tell us a little bit about how that project grew out of this more like a publication media space that's very infused to sort of internet, born in the internet age, infused at the sort of tech culture, and now into a venture capital fund. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, so it's kind of a natural progression. Like Kareem said, we had been in the tech world for so long. I've been through 6 very successful startups. And I just recently went back to one of them. So I was an early employee at Facebook in 2007, 2008, when there was 300 employees and maybe less than 50 million people on the platform. And before that, I was early employee at Google, at VMware, at NetGravity, DoubleClick, Silicon Graphics. All these companies had pretty major effects on the trajectory of tech. And we saw, I also do angel investing on the side, and my wife is with an angel investing group. She was with one in Northern California in Silicon Valley, and then she's currently with the one in Southern California. And so we, get a lot of education in how good companies come to be, right? And how that capital gets deployed and who the good people are and what to look for. And so we have this kind of backing. And in the gun space, we were mainly worried about, culture and advancing 2A rights. And we'd been to SHOT Show, a bunch of times. And we found some synergies, if we're going to use a funny word, between like what we need in the gun world and what we saw in the tech world. And and you've talked about this. You just recently talked about it with your analysis of the NRA with one of your guests, and kind of like this gun culture or guns 2.0. We're into like gun culture 3.0, right? And I think David Yamani, whoever's kind of set that up. And there's a new bunch of people, like social media aware, like tech aware, younger, like the FUD generation is finally gone pretty much, right? Instagram, YouTube has killed the FUD world completely. So no one's going to laugh at a plastic pistol that's very ugly and uses a striker like they did in 1980, right? When Gaston Glock had a great idea that was ridiculed, mocked universally across the gun world at the time, right? 9mm was a joke, like, oh, Wonder Nines and those wimpy little 9, cartridges can't hold up to my 45 ACP. So we're in like the third iteration of that, where that's all gone. And we have innovative people who don't have any of that baggage and want to do cool things in the space. So we were frustrated in that these people didn't have the infrastructure that people coming out of Y Combinator did, which is an incubator for software, right? So they don't have access to capital, mentorship, all sorts of tools that they would use to help bootstrap their minimal viable product, to get their thing to market, to crowdsource, to do all these things. A lot of that either because of ignorance on the part of the third-party tools. They lock gun companies or gun-related things out of that. And a lot of VCs and angel groups are not going to touch an innovative new gun object or something that attaches to the gun. Not even about guns themselves, just about accessories, widgets, software platforms. Any of that stuff is verboten, just because of ignorance and just not wanting to deal with the hassle of going into that space. So that's why we started OSD Capital. And OSD Capital wants to deploy funds to innovative companies in the civilian defense industry. And to be clear, we're very early in this process. We're still establishing, are there enough companies to do this? Are there enough innovative people to drive these new things? But it's exciting because we see the beginnings of it, and clearly it's going to happen, right?
Interesting. Yeah. I just find the whole project to be pretty fascinating, especially in this industry, because it is kind of a bit of a dinosaur industry. Like it's manufacturing. It's the gun behind me here, an AR-15, is considered by most Americans to be a very modern firearm, but it's really not. It's from the 1950s, right? And as you described, the striker-fired Glocks are still kind of just considered to be the new wave thing by a lot of older generations, and that's from the 1980s, as you just described. There's a very conservative industry, not just politically, which it is, to be frank, but also just in culturally, it's very conservative. It moves slowly. People value reliability over the latest technology in a lot of cases, but that has been changing, I think. The last 10, 20 years, for many of the reasons you're talking about. The internet has changed a lot, just as it has with everything in our lives. Now I think if you show up to a range to do training and you don't have a red dot optic on your sight, not that that's a wildly advanced piece of technology, but it is something where you may be ridiculed as gun Amish, is what my friend John Correa at Active Self-Protection calls folks who are adverse to putting optics on their firearms. But, it is interesting to see something like this, because I don't think we've seen anything quite like it before. Not that there isn't innovation going on in the space all the time, but it's certainly not in the same level and same approach that you see in the tech industry, right? And that's where you're hoping to bridge here.
Well, I think it's kind of funny. We have seen it before, but it was about 160 years ago, right? So when, I don't know if you'd call it the modern gun industry, but kind of the beginnings of modern gun technology started. So Samuel Colt, John Browning, Hiram Percy Maxim, these people were the tech entrepreneurs of their day. And then, I think the NFA had something to do with it. I don't think that was the only thing. It would be interesting someone should write a book about why this happened. But the industry basically fell asleep for 70 or 80 years. And from around the time of the passage of the NFA in 1934 until kind of the dawn of social media, that's the FUD era we're talking about, right? To your point, the AR-15 was invented in the 50s and became accepted as kind of a good modern gun that is the default rifle people buy in the 2010s, right? 60 years later. But in the 2010s, with the rise of social media, we've seen the industry wake up, and there's been more innovation in the past 10 or 15 years than in the 50 or 60 years before it. We often say like the most important gun rights innovation, certainly of the 21st century, and probably going back further than that, is not any gun, it's YouTube and Instagram. And those probably did more for gun rights than any like kind of widget you could think of, at least in recent history.
And video games as well, right? You put that in there. Mm-hmm.
Big time. So, I mean, I think we're seeing now like the industry change form again from kind of like a lumbering old, just kind of like commodity manufacturing industry back into like tech innovation. And I think some of that is in the guns themselves, and a lot of it is in stuff around guns and gun culture generally. So I'm sure we can get into this, but when you think about stuff like drones, comms, first aid, night vision, like these are not guns, but they help people exercise their right to self-defense and their ability to be self-reliant. And that's just as important.
Yeah. And so why don't you give us maybe some examples of the things you see right now in the gun market or in the self-defense space, emergency medical space, which are all fairly related, that makes you feel that way? Like, what are some of the innovations you've seen that make you, I guess, excited about the opportunity to try and find more breakthroughs with this venture capital initiative, and that signal to you that there are real opportunities there?
So it's a good question, and it takes some work, and that's why that's the value that we add to the equation. Is that we're very well connected to the industry, and we get to see things and hear what people are doing. One of the first things we invested in is a company called Armanet, so armanet.co, and this is a software company. And so it was natural for us, being software guys, to naturally, this is a great first investment. And what they're doing is a programmatic ad platform, which is about as exciting as paint. But it's the backbone of the internet commerce world, right? So internet advertising, which is the first startup I did in 1994, was a company called NetGravity, was the first internet advertising system available online. It's the first banner ads were served by NetGravity on a Perl server that I wrote, was serving ads on site from Yahoo, CNN, Time Warner Properties. That's how the internet started in the mid 90s, right? It was on the backbone of those banner ads. To this day, nobody at SHOT, or very few percentage of people who have booth at SHOT, can advertise on any social platform. Even you, the
right.
Reload, cannot advertise on most of the social platforms. You don't sell any guns. You just talk about it. It's insane. So Armanet, people have tried to crack this nut, but Armanet is a really good bunch of software-centric people who also are gun nuts. But being they're good software people, they wrote this platform that is an excellent platform for publishers and advertisers to get their ecosystem up and running. So there's millions of dollars that have been pent up in digital advertising from all the companies across the floor at SHOT Show. Now have an outlet where they don't have to censor themselves. They can show their products the way they want, with the lifestyle imaging that they want, the hunting imaging they want, whatever it is. And they have very happy publishers, and publishers have very happy advertisers to go and get that ecosystem up and running. So that's an easy home run. There's we're looking for other kind of greenfield, things here, things that have been shut out because of this artificial barrier that's put in front of all gun things across the digital world.
Certainly there's seems like an obvious market there because, as you mentioned, gun companies are shut out of the pre-existing online ecosystem in a lot of ways, whether it's through advertising bans or social media platforms not allowing their certain kinds of content. So there's sort of very clear opportunities there, I'd imagine. Although obviously not a new idea, right? The online advertising, just picking an opportunity where gun companies have been shut out. What are some of the technological advancement that you've seen recently with firearms? I mean, would it be like red dots, or I know Magpul's had some systems for like counting electronically how many rounds are left in sort of video game movie stuff in real life. There's been advancements in thermal technology. Is that the sort of thing that you're looking at over the recent technological advancements in the space that make you think there's room for more of those sorts of things? I know and then we'll get into maybe some of where you want to see things go, but I'm just interested in what are right now, when you look around in the space, what, new developments are you seeing that get you interested and excited?
Let me tell you kind of the framework and then answer the question, because it helps to kind of think through what we see. Like, the reason tech investing works is because every so often a company ends up being worth $100 billion. The way Jeff Bezos put it is like, imagine if every time you went up to a bat, like in baseball, went up to that, there was a chance you wouldn't hit 1 run or 4 runs. There's just a chance you'd hit 1,000 runs in one at bat. That would completely change the game of baseball.
Right.
If you go to SHOT Show, I don't think the entire building put together is worth $100 billion. And that's been kind of a fundamental structural challenge in investing in the space and just finding hypergrowth in the space. Most companies in the space, even if they're super successful, this does not mean they're bad companies. They could be awesome companies that are like great for the founders, great for the employees, great for customers, but just not investable, because if you're investing at an early stage, there's a high risk the company will not be a great investment. And the way you pay for that risk is that the ones that are great investments pay like 50x or 100x. Right.
And that I imagine is one of the major challenges with the gun industry in particular, because it's much smaller than people imagine it is, because it has so much cultural impact and gets discussed a lot. There's only 2 publicly traded gun companies in America, Ruger and Smith & Wesson. And Smith & Wesson is the only company in the only gun manufacturer who's ever posted $1 billion a year. I mean, you compare that to the tech companies you're mentioning earlier, that's a rounding error for most of them.
Yeah.
Most of these
they
companies
do $1 billion weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's exactly it. So basically what we try to look for is companies that are going to go beyond some very niche market and ultimately have a big impact. That doesn't mean they shouldn't start in a niche. That's actually a great way to start, is some like really specific use case and solving a problem for a set of customers who love your product. But then there needs to be some path to going beyond that to a broader market. So generally, like things we're seeing, we wrote about this in the newsletter a few weeks ago. Fire-by-wire is super exciting, mainly because that is just a fundamental change to the way guns work. That we have this principle of like when you start making things controlled by software, they start taking on the properties of software of being like extremely malleable, extremely hard to stop, extremely friendly to innovation. And so fire-by-wire, what that does is it kind of turns part of the gun into software, right? Like it turns the decision of how and when to fire into a software controllable question, right, which is super powerful.
Because fire-by-wire, just for quick explain for people who don't know, is what you would see in jets, military jets, or things like they're like fly-by-wire, where the controls are not actually physically connected to the control surfaces on your jet. They're connected by computer. You're sending computer signals to move things. The Cybertruck, I believe, has drive-by-wire. I think Mercedes has started doing cars with that as well. And so this is the idea of you pull the trigger, On a regular gun, that's a mechanical action that releases the striker or the hammer or what have you and fires the gun mechanically. But there is the potential for a system where you pull the trigger and instead of a mechanical reaction, it's electronic, right? That's the idea.
Exactly. And, imagine combining that with like cameras, AI, there's all sorts of cool targeting systems. There's all sorts of cool stuff you could do. I think BioFire is the only company I'm aware of that is doing that right now.
Right.
But I think it's a super cool start, and we'll see where other people take it as well as where they take it.
Yeah. I mean, we interviewed the CEO a while back now. I don't know what's going on with BioFire, to be honest. They were supposed to have launched their firearm, which, as you mentioned, does have a fire-by-wire system. It is, it's a smart gun. It's built around the idea of biosecurity. So that's why it's fire-by-wire, because it needs to verify that you're the actual user before it will fire a shot. And so the only way they could, at least in their explanation, is the only way they could do that was with the fire-by-wire system. But you're right that presumably would open up all kinds of interesting possibilities that just don't exist with the firearms we have today. Now that gun I don't think has come out to market yet. So there may be some development delays there. I haven't heard anything lately from them, but yeah, I mean, so that's the kind of thing you're looking at. Those like fire-by-wire platform. I think you guys talked about firearms as a platform. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the promise of the SIG P320, this idea of like a fire control unit that people could build on, that's the promise. I don't think that has happened with the P320 yet. Maybe it will. I don't know. But like, what is kind of an open source platform for a handgun or a rifle that lots of companies could build on top of? And then I'll curious what Chuck thinks, but we're seeing a lot swirling kind of adjacent to guns in the intersection of like drones, AI, comms. We don't know what's happening there yet exactly, but there's just so much activity, and we see a bunch of cool companies experimenting with kind of different angles on that combination of things. I'd be very surprised if some really cool stuff doesn't come out of that area in the next few years.
Yeah. So Chuck, give us a little more on that. It sounds like you guys are expecting, you talked about this 100 years ago. There was a lot of innovation in the firearms space. People can, if you watch Forgotten Weapons, right, with Ian McCallum, he talks a lot about a lot of these wildly different designs than what we ended up becoming the industry standards in a lot of ways. And it sounds like you guys think we're maybe at the cusp of another era like that. And that's why you believe in this concept of doing a venture capital firm for these sorts of developments.
Right. I mean, to Kareem's point, and to kind of burst your bubble, Stephen, it's what we're seeing so far is not anything significant in the fundamental, like the gun itself. BioFire is interesting. The 320 chassis is interesting. The 320, actually, the 320 module has the best potential to be like really groundbreaking if a bunch of STL files, or I mean, there are a bunch, but a lot of 3D printed things you could do around the fire control unit become interesting, but it's still pretty niche. It's going to be enthusiasts.
They're kind of those are out there. The PSA Dagger would be maybe another example of something like that. But
and
they're
those
all
are great.
Kind of proprietarized at this point.
But those are at the stage where they're probably 10 years away from really turning into something that is going to be completely modular and consumer ready. So like Kareem says, the exciting thing, I'll give you two examples. One is more physical. Maybe you'll be pacified by that. But what we're seeing, like to Kareem's point, like a lot of these don't have that 10X or that 100X, potential. Drones, we get a ton of people coming in with drone solutions. So like you are absolutely going to see like personal drones, personal defense drones. You can't really arm them as a civilian. You can put other non-lethal things on them. But like the idea of two charging UAVs on the corners of your house with an AI powered security system with cameras that figures out like, I don't want this person here. And they launch and track or maybe harass them with pepper balls or whatever it is, paintballs or whatever. So you can do harassing fire, non-lethal harassing fire for your perimeter for animals and people, or even just recon, or for your neighborhood if you band together, like the Isaac Botkin model of like neighborhoods banding together and kind of patrolling their own areas. So there's potential there. There's a ton of people doing really cool things with UAVs. And we've had a couple on our podcast, the OSD podcast, which people are free to go Google for that and listen to those. But the one that's going to be the 10X thing is, and this is so ripe, I'm giving you a very hot tip right here, okay? So go out and invest. This is not investment advice, and this is completely opinions and completely BS, so don't do what I just said. But the area of like night vision, thermal, that has been so stagnant. It's like the gun culture 1.0. They're in the 45 ACP era, right? With the PVS models and the L3 and FLIR just like bottling up, just bottling up innovation and distribution, and just have this golden goose that they don't want to let loose. People are tired of that, and we saw just recently an amazing. I know people are very poo-poo on digital night vision, mainly because it does some wonky upsampling and has latency issues and resolution issues. But we are starting to see some solutions based on very cutting-edge AI that can do effectively, let's call it upsampling. That is phenomenal. So you can take a grainy CCD image, not even a very good night vision camera or night vision device, completely pixelated, but there is, we don't see it as humans because we just see noise. But you can train models that look at that noise and extract in relatively detailed information that is pretty phenomenal, and do it with latencies that don't make you want to throw up if you're using it. So that's a big one. That's a 10X, 100X thing, because the applications in consumer, maritime, military, law enforcement, automotive, like all these things are wide open for this technology.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's interesting. It's sort of, I guess, even going back to the ad tech platform that you mentioned earlier that you guys are invested in, that's another one where, if it does well enough or innovates well enough, perhaps it can compete against even Google down the line, especially if
because the things the things that are denied advertising, it's not just 2A. Right. There's this whole idea of this new freedom economy where anything or anybody who wants to advertise in a more free speech or a more non-conventional way that can't get access to normal advertising or have just even philosophical issues with advertising with platforms that don't want them and basically are against their ideology. They have a way to go that's kind of unbounded on that side. It's not just gun stuff. It's actually this whole freedom economy stuff.
Yeah. So you're kind of going into an area where that's been fairly neglected in this regard, as far as the kind of infrastructure and investment that you're talking about, and trying to find people who are innovating directly in the space, but also what they're doing has a potential to have an impact well beyond that down the line. Like sounds like the hope, because as we mentioned, the gun industry itself pretty small. Not that there aren't good businesses in it, but it's fairly small in scope. And right now is a particularly down time, or at least people are expecting the next couple of years here to be a down period for the industry, and tariffs are coming in, which may harm, manufacturing heavy industry like guns. But, it's sort of it sounds like you're taking people who've been cut off from the traditional methods of venture funding, trying to find the most innovative people in that space, work with them on what they're directly doing, and maybe, if you're lucky, find something that grows beyond the scope of just guns or self-defense in particular. Am I summing it up right, or what do you think?
You nailed it. Yeah, I think there's also, hopefully, if we succeed at that, kind of a flywheel effect we can build of like one success breeds another, attracts more people to the space, and grows the space. Because this is why we say we look at civilian defense and not the gun industry specifically, because guns are a technology, but civilian defense broadly means, the ability to defend yourself and preserve your freedom and rely on yourself when you need to. And that goes way beyond guns. It includes guns, of course, but guns are, the very center of a bunch of concentric circles there.
Stephen,
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I owe you, I said I would give you 2 examples. I feel bad. I want to give you something tangible, something you can hold. And I'm sure like people like the idea of like this, software but there's, as far as we talked to one company called Unit Solutions that I think is pretty cool. And they came up with a solution for doing force on force training. That's not simunitions or was it UTF or what's the other one? UTM, yeah. Which are really hard to use, have all sorts of issues, even import issues. They instead built a non-firearm that is exactly an M4 with a pistol coming down the works that operates completely like your normal M4. You can configure it as your proper M4 that uses effectively airsoft style, but super reliable, super accurate airsoft stuff. So you can do training in your house, in your garage. You can do force on force training with your buds or at a class with not the danger of using like UTM or simunitions there. So I want to give you at least one that has their numbers are good selling into LE, military, and even civilian because it's a very accessible thing. Has a good recurring revenue model in terms of like the cartridges and the ammunition. Or the pellets, or call it ammunition.
Right.
So that's an example of, there are physical things that are attractive, that have good slope. Maybe not to $1 billion, but like possibly. So just wanted to give you that example.
Right. It's not all about trying to find the next Google's in the gun space somewhere. It's also just trying to find and scale solid business ideas in a way that is neglected largely because of the space that you're in, right? I mean, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, there were some other interesting ideas in the newsletter that you guys put out about, the sort of areas that you're looking at. One was silencers and suppressors, which is, I think, really has been kind of undercovered in some ways how fast that part of the industry is growing. Especially in recent years when the ATF has actually made it a bit easier, or not a bit easier, a lot easier to actually legally obtain suppressors. You still have to pay the tax stamp, which is a burden, and you still have to do all the paperwork, but the paperwork gets processed much faster than it used to. There's been some innovation on that front from the private sector and, going through the registration process and things like, was it Silencer Shop. Yeah, Silencer Shop has those kiosks that you can do the fingerprinting at. It makes the whole process a lot better. There's also been innovation in the actual device, maybe for the first time in significant innovation for the first time in 100 years, right, since those were invented. So just a little bit more about what you're hoping to see with suppressors in particular, because that does interest. I think that's a fascinating area that a lot of people understand that there has been a lot of change there recently.
Yeah, I think silencers are on the cusp. When you talk about we've been talking about things outside of guns themselves, but something very close to a gun, I guess legally it is a gun, that is on the cusp of, I think, being way, way bigger than it is. Silencers are a great example. So here's why. In a sane world, in a world where the NFA had never been passed, I think pretty much all guns would be integrally suppressed. There's a lot of problems with that. I think, the integral suppressors we are used to today would have some quirks, are not perfect, but I don't think there's any problem there that would not have been solved by 90 years of manufacturing innovation.
Kind of like cars, basically.
Yeah,
it's the same technology.
Exactly. All cars are legally required to be integrally suppressed. And so, we have 400 million guns in the country, well, 400 million plus. And I think 1/100th that number of silencers, maybe like 1/50th, something like that. And then when you look at the pent up demand, it's just insane. So to your point, the ATF turned the Form 4 turnaround time, approval times from some, on the order of like 4 to 6 months to a couple weeks.
Yeah. Or it's even down to, I think, days or even hours in some cases from what I've heard.
That's insane. Okay. So like just that, the process itself is the same. The tax stamp is the same. And all they said is, okay, now instead of having to wait a few months, now you wait, hours, days. Just that pretty much doubled silencer sales last year. They were up 80% year over year. So like data point number one. Data point number two, Silencer Shop, you mentioned. They invented this kiosk system that they put in FFLs around the country. That just like abstracts away the Form 4. You go in, take your picture on the kiosk, put in your fingerprints on their scanner, and you don't have to fill out the paper forms or like figure out how to, roll your own fingerprints. And doing that, I do not have inside info on them, but just if you back out kind of the ATF publishes how many silencers are sold each year, you can find kind of public estimates of what percentage of those are sold by Silencer Shop and multiply that by like a kind of reasonable average selling price. And conservative estimate, Silencer Shop is doing $70 million a year in revenue, having taken no investment as far as I can tell. So they bootstrapped their way to 70 million in revenue, selling literally the most highly regulated consumer good in the country, right? Like, is there any other thing you can buy at a store where if you buy it wrong, you go to prison for 10 years? Like, I'm not aware of any other, there's nothing at Walmart that fits that description. So like, that's insane. People really, really want these. And there are like several 100 million guns that should have silencers on them. And they will, by God, by the time we get done. Or like, we want to see that happen. And I think, I don't want to say it's inevitable, but like the universe seems to be pushing that way.
But so Silencer Shop would be maybe an example of a company. You're not currently invested in them, but that's sort of an example of a company that you're trying to find. Somebody who used technological innovation to improve the process in that space and was very successful at it. And I don't know what their initial, we don't know the company numbers, but presumably they've done well off of whatever their initial investment was. And so that's sort of maybe an example of the kind of company that you're trying to find.
Exactly.
Okay.
The Silencer Shop of today, or even the Magpul of today, right? Like what's the next Magpul, where they just, or even like a Vista that has the mass to really drive things to a 10x level.
Okay. And then as you mentioned, it's sort of not just specifically gun related, but even things like emergency medical products, especially on a sort of an individual or community basis. Like I think you guys mentioned an example, what AEDs, the things you use if someone's having a heart attack. There's a lot of potential for innovation in the medical space that's sort of connected to or ancillary to the self-defense space, right? That's another area you're looking at?
A little bit. I mean, I see that a lot in actually looking over my wife's shoulder, who does more open general investing in software and consumer. The big ones that she sees, and we've actually referenced some of these companies in through OSD to one of our co-founders, Tom Rader, has a company that does medical. Kareem, what's the name of that?
Medical Points Abroad.
Medical Points Abroad. Really good stuff. They do big packs, small packs, bespoke packs for particular groups, military and not. Call him one of our investments because he's on the team. But she has seen really good pitch decks for all sorts of new blood draw ways, new field tourniquets, a core body tourniquet, if you will. So basically a positive pressure kind of middle of the body tourniquet where you can stop hemorrhaging in the field. So there
Kind of
are absolutely
an alternative to packing the wound or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are some packing innovations, but there is even like the most simple thing. There was a company, it's a very specific thing, but for the thoracic cavity, when you're doing that equalization with a needle that you're supposed to do, if I don't know, I'm not super into the medical stuff,
situation.
But if somebody loses pressurization in their core, you can equalize it with this pin, and then you open this valve, and it equalizes the buildup. Well, in the field, when you're using that, it's chaos. And you can't, they pull the standard of care is you put it in there and you're supposed to listen for this. You can tell what's going on by the airflow. So they just invented a device that when you stick it in, it does that, but it also shows you a color of like red or green, depending on what the airflow is doing, because you can't hear, because there's sirens and, gunshots and you're in a war zone or a traffic accident or whatever.
Right.
So those innovations are outside of the gun space. It's interesting to see
But they're connected.
But it's spreading just besides us. So just not gun nuts are worried about kind of self-reliance or self-agency. It's in the normie world more and more. So that was interesting data points from her venture group, or her angel group.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of different areas that you're examining. It's not just, we want to find the next SIG or Glock. It's all kinds of different stuff. And it's, based on this idea that perhaps this space has been neglected by the rest of the investing community because of sort of a stigma that exists, both legally and culturally around, putting venture money into gun related companies. Is that basic problem you're trying to solve for here?
Exactly. I think part of it is stigma and part of it is just blind spot. Like, it's not a space people are even necessarily familiar with. And to your point earlier, it has historically been a relatively small space and just easy to miss. So whether it's through kind of active or knowing stigma or just ignorance, I think it's something people have missed.
Okay, great. Well, hey, look, I appreciate you guys coming on and explaining what I think is a very interesting new venture that you guys are doing. I haven't heard of anything quite like this in the gun space before, or the civilian defense space, as you described. And I look forward to covering it and following how you guys pull this off and how it goes. But if people want to also follow it themselves, they just want to keep up to date with open source defense, and then they want to know more about OSD Capital, how can they do that? So
the point I want to make, and make sure that your listeners get this, if you're an entrepreneur and you have these ideas, or you're going down this road, or you just want some mentors or someone to talk to, or maybe show your pitch deck to friendly faces, that's us. So fund@opensourcedefense.com. So you can reach out. So I want to make sure anyone does that. And also, if you're on the other side of the equation, you're someone who can deploy capital. You're what's called an accredited investor, which is a relatively, which is a bar you need to be passed in order to do these kinds of investments. But we would love to talk to you if you have capital you want to put out there. I think we're the best. We're the best organization right now to have avenues into this space to get into these investments. So again, fund@opensourcedefense.com would be a great way to contact us and get the conversation going. And
Kareem, if people just want to follow your writing, because I do think the writing itself is valuable as well, where can they do that?
Go to opensourcedefense.com, and there you can find all our writing and our podcast. So Twitter, Instagram, weekly Substack, and podcast, all linked from opensourcedefense.com.
All right, wonderful. Well, appreciate it again, guys. And that's all we've got for this week. So if you want to keep up to date with what we're doing at The Reload, of course, you guys can head over to thereload.com and sign up for our free weekly newsletter, or you can buy a membership to help fund the operations we do here at The Reload, which are bootstrapped and primarily, almost really entirely helped along by our membership dues. So you can buy a membership over there. You'll get exclusive access to this podcast a day early and hundreds of pieces of analysis and reporting you won't find anywhere else. That's all we got for you guys this week. We will see you again real soon.